the semi-finals of the International InterVarsity debate. On opening government, we have UMA. We have Venus FA. Closing government, we have Marathi. Closing opposition, we have BACA. In the semi-finals with Luke, Bunny, Alistair, and myself. So, a few house rules considering there's a decent amount of crowd. Make sure that you guys only leave the room in between speeches and between speeches. If you have to discuss, make sure it's in the minimum volume or don't discuss at all. Or similar principle applies for cheering, don't boo people, and also silent your phone. On the motion, assuming Josef Mengele has discovered incurable cancer, this House believes that it is morally responsible for the medical community to try and invite Prime Minister.
Huh? Testing? No. Panel, what is this debate about? We've got a person by the name of Josef Mengele, who's apparently a very horrible person when it comes to medical ethics and upholding humanity and human rights in of itself. But this person is someone who inevitably, through his unethical means, has discovered a cure for cancer. And assuming as to how the motion is worded, we'll assume that this information is one that is made public, which is why the medical community is aware of it. And this debate is a value judgment debate as to what is it that we as personnel of the medical community, both doctors, nurses, healthcare professionals, anyone within the industry should decide, should do with regards to this particular cure of cancer. The model on the side opening government is simple. We would destroy this piece of evidence. We are okay with not administering this cure to anybody at all. We are okay with us like completely like shitting on this piece of cure and saying, discrediting, saying it doesn't work, it has horrible side effects. If anybody takes it, people will die. We are also okay with continuing our existing efforts to find a cure through ethical means, because that's what, as the medical community, we should do. In brief, the medical community, in doing this, has to recognize as to what is it that these efforts would entail. Because we have to think about not just what does it represent to medicine today, but the future of medicine, and what does this action lead in terms of precedences. In my speech, I'll do a few things. First, I'll discuss what is it that is the status of cancer with regards to the current context. Second, why is it one that is this proposal has to be passed based on ethics and morality with regards to the medical community. Third, outcomes if we choose to. Right. So first, the status of cancer. Cancer is a cure. It's a disease that has existed within mankind for centuries. In the present context, there are many, with the advancement of technology, there are a lot of cancers that are not as fatal as they were prior to this. Things like cervical cancer, things like testicular cancer, prostate cancer, things like breast cancers. All of these things have developed so much to the extent that it doesn't kill you if you have got these cancers to begin with. Things like chemotherapy, things like surgeries to remove growths, whatnot. All of cancer is not a death sentence, sit down, as it was prior to this, right? And all of this is because of the advancement of medical technology that we already have. We have been pushing so much for a cure towards cancer to begin with, right? And we also would posit, considering this development, that Josef Mengele has somewhat created a cure. Now we know that a cure can be found, right? So we think it's amazing that we can continue our ethical means of finding towards this cure. We're okay with funding more money, more research, all of this data that we know that is possible, that we can explore into the options that were employed by more ethical means. This debate has to take that into cognizance, because the trade-off is this. Do you take a cure right now that we somehow work a lot faster because it's already discovered, or we are okay with waiting for a longer time if it means we get to achieve this cure to an ethical means, because that's the trade-off that side opening government is willing to take. Sit down. Ethics. And why do you think ethics is something that's very important? So this debate has to take into cognizance of the way the motion is structured in terms of the medical community, and what is it that is in the interest of the medical community when it comes to ethics. The medical community is a body that has upheld things like the Hippocratic Oath, uphold things like the principle of first do no harm. All of this implies that the manner in which we reach the end goal of treating another person must be one that is justified through the means you achieve towards it. Why is this something that we've always pushed for? Because we've always rejected things like human testing. We've also rejected things like animal testing. Because the end goal of your profession is to cure and help another. And it cannot be reached, it cannot be achieved through a method that harms another individual, makes a person endure so much pain and suffering, right? Because that's not something you would push for. Please sit down. Things like the basic principle, first idea of this, right? Like everyone is born equal. You are not higher than that prisoner that is in Auschwitz. You are not greater than that starving child in Africa. Everyone's life is equal. And it's for this reason we cannot put another individual's life at a lower pedestal to make our lives better. And this is something that the medical community has always pushed for. But the second idea, the individuals that have joined this experiment are individuals that have never consented to giving their lives and their bodies towards this experimentation. And this is a principle that medical community always holds dearly to, the idea of consent. Even if it means to harming a body, the idea of consent has to be there, and it's for the greater good of pain or suffering. And this is something that's not adhered to here as well. Please sit down. Let's talk about Josef Mengele a little bit. Mengele, right? This is a person that's worked in this Auschwitz camp, a camp that was taking a lot of Jewish people into concentration camp. This is the individual that experimented on people like children, women, pregnant women, right? Any and all prisoners that he would get. All of the reasons for what? Because he was a crazy person that was so fanatic about discovering any and all things. This is the same person that caught gypsies and operated onto them, cut them open to look into their body and see, are they anatomically different from us? Is that why we're treating them as such? This is a person that does all of these things, and it just sews them up and burns them eventually, right? These are the unethical means for no apparent reason that this person does. So happens he finds a cure for cancer. We're not going to condone all his actions. Because what does you accepting this cure does? This is the outcomes and the harms, right? Similarly, as to how Alexander Fleming found penicillin, Edward Jenner found smallpox vaccine. These are amazing discoveries that did things. These people were revered. These people were put at the highest pedestal because these are people who saved humanity when it comes to all these diseases. See, if you put Josef, this Mengele person, on the same pedestal as them, it's a shame because all of the cure that you get is not achieved through these ethical means that we push for. This is bad. Why? Because you incentivize people, it's fine. Do whatever you want as long as you find the cure. It doesn't matter if you kill a person. It doesn't matter if someone's life is slower than yours. This is not the principle in which the medical committee should push for. How does this affect individuals on a societal level, right? Because right now, if let's say the medical committee says, fine, we will take this call and I will employ it onto individuals, we think this is bad because it breaks the golden rule that exists in society. What is this golden rule? The golden rule is the golden rule is one that talks about how we can never harm another individual for our own benefit, right? Because this is what holds society together. The golden rule is the one that is employed within the social construct to make sure an individual doesn't exploit another for his own benefit. Through this proposal, the moment you employ this, it shows that it's perfectly fine for you to, if someone can benefit, if you can reap some benefit from it and harm another individual. What does this mean? It means simply that you can kill all the poor people in your country if it means that you're going to reduce things like global warming. You can arrest all these black people if it means it is fine that you feel more secure. All of these things, these principles are independent of any outcomes that you can get. This is an important principle that lives and strives within our society. We can't sacrifice all of these principles, something that's working for ages, something that works not only in the medical community, but society, and keep societal in function because of one cure that can so happen save the lives of people that individuals that have cancer, right? Because we also have to take in cognizance of the number of lives that have lost. The number of lives and that we suffer is not lost to the acceptance of unethical means to achieve a goal, whatever it may be. This debate is not just about how much cancer has done for us, but it's beyond that. As to what is it this thing, acceptance by the medical community would entail for the greater good of community, we would reject this cure.
So happens saved the lives, as literally the ending of the speaker before me in his speech. So happens. the fact that the opening government would so rudely downplay the suffering of individuals and be so uncomparative about it is a shame. I will deal with the speaker before me in two responses, dealing with ethics and then deaths. And before moving on to my own arguments about how it is morally acceptable to actually use this cure, and on the converse, is morally abhorrent to destroy this cure, because the position of side opening opposition is that the medical community must prioritize the saving of current and future lives over the moral stance of Joseph, whatever his name is. We think that it's what we are going to do is that we're going to use his records and data. We will build on his post research. If he was still alive, we will give him research and funds. This doesn't mean we're going to credit him and revere him, because that's a burden push that we don't think we're going to accept. In principle, what we are going to do is we're going to use whatever means in order to cure cancer. The interest of the medical community is that we must follow the principle of a duty of care, as well as to find ways to improve human lives, both of which the opening government does not do. Before I move on, clarifications. Yes.
So are you okay using any and all unethical means you can get a cure, and when would your side stop?
Yes, we are saying that insofar as there is a proportional amount of ability to actually cure someone, and in order to restore human lives, if the trade-off is enough, we will take it, right? We are saying that the ethics essentially does not fall into the opening government. Essentially, when they say that first do no harm, they are literally causing harm because they're complicit in the continuance of suffering. Them removing themselves away, even though they have the knowledge to do so, is literally ignoring your duty of care. The golden rule that he says, and this is literally the link by which he supports this first do no harm principle, is that you cannot do it for your own benefit. That assumes that this is him doing it for his own benefit rather than actually restoring the harms that was caused. We say that we're not paying him. We're not, like, he's not profiting in any way. Instead, the medical community is taking back what it can to restore the injustices of this world. You say that you just want to reject human and animal testing. Well, that's not true, right? We currently already do human and animal testing, and it's debatable whether or not it's justified. We think that it is on opening opposition side, because each victim in their own right does have a set of victimhoods, but it must be comparative to what is being restored in exchange. This means that if we can, in exchange for the suffering, we can end all future suffering. It means that there is a production of benefit to this world that you necessarily create. We think it's unrealistic that you say that, oh, we incentivize people to do bad things. Like, look, we're not taking him out of jail. We're not reviving him from life. We are saying that we are taking whatever suffering has been caused and restoring the current lives. The deaths that we say, and this is my second issue before I move on to my argument. So deaths. The argument that comes from Vinod assumes that it's okay insofar as you don't die. It assumes that you have no suffering as long as you don't die. Look, you can say that we are already moving towards all these cures, but all these lives still experience some suffering. It's not enough for you to just say that they don't experience suffering. Essentially, in my argument, I will tell you why the use of that cure is morally justified. Let us look at cancer, because they were uncomparative in actually explaining what the suffering that's caused by cancer. Cancer is the torture of the world that cuts through all human life. That is indiscriminate in the ways it leads. It is literally the leading cause of death in many of these countries, in most countries, right? Some of them don't kill you, but they cause you an immense amount of suffering and without a cure. So, for example, and there are 4 levels to this. The first is that it is a high amount of death. There are literally 500,000 deaths per year in a single country that is caused by cancer. Secondly, it's a slow death. You can see that's chemotherapy or checkups or the waiting, but all that causes you to slowly die. It is unlike any other death where literally it's a painful walk towards the end of the road. It is a degrading death. The fact that you vomit as a result of chemotherapy, and the fact that you lose your hair and identity and your ability to actually spend your time with your loved ones, all these things mean that it's literally degrading to have cancer. But it's also a costly death that affects the rest of people's lives. That means that not only you, but the ripple effects of the people around you. It takes so much that it puts people in poverty, because literally it's that expensive to cure cancer. But the worst part is it's eternally pervasive, right? So the deaths that were caused by this guy, what happened already, and we accept that those atrocities were terrible, and the victimhood may either be equal or more than the current victimhood of a single cancer patient. But as a result of this eternal disease that it will never be stopped in your world, or will take such a long time to be stopped in your world, we think that essentially these mistakes have been made. We must correct these mistakes. So the link that comes in open opposition is that the only way to correct these mistakes is by preventing future harm, which literally comes into the principle that Vinod says is so important. The reason why we care more about reparation, ICC, we actually care about correcting past injustices and finding more ways to actually resolve those past injustices. The medical community essentially should prioritize this reconstruction of the world and given the magnitude of the evil caused. If you allow this evil to be caused without any form of reparations, instead to cause more evil, the medical community fails in its ethics. We think that maybe this guy didn't have the intent to save more lives, but the only way for humanity to actually step in his place, because the humanity was also complicit in all the harms he created, essentially that only way is by allowing him allowing for the use of that cure. We said two things. Either first, the scale of victimhood is equal or like more, equal or more, but essentially must be restored. Or secondly, like that restoration, it must be quicker than slower, because even if you say it's not equal now, like the many years it will take means that like the expansion of that the suffering means that it's actually an asymmetry of that, right? The destruction also is morally abhorrent. We think that essentially what it means is that you had a duty of care because you knew. In the same way how, like if a doctor on the plane, if that person is the only doctor on the plane, they cannot ignore their duty of care. They must save that person, even if that person is a convict or a convict or someone that you feel is evil. Would you not have saved that person's life? We think that it means that you ignore your responsibilities as a medical community the moment you are negligent, and the fact that you knew exactly how to save a person. You watch a person with cancer suffer, maybe not like, first of all, like they do die, like many of them do, even if they are currently mitigating factors, but like person has to go through and disrupt their lives and experience the degradation of chemotherapy, and the fact that all their family members also have to suffer the impacts of cancer. You're the one who causes further suffering in this world and choose not to prevent it. That is negligence.
Sorry, whoever using the timer, please use your time. So we only have one time.
Hello. Okay. Let me silence it. No doubt, people who suffer from cancer suffer probably horrendously, right? But it has to be comparative. It has to be comparative to the message the medical community sends out to governments, the population, about the benefits of unethical experimentation that oppresses the poor and the vulnerable in society. It has to be comparative to the suffering of the victims who never consented to having their bodies used for the benefits of people in the future who died thinking, why God is this happening to me? It has to be weighted to the current progress, which is factual, that we have made in the progress of cancer research, right? Vinod has told you how 7 types of cancer we found cures for them, and a lot of cancers are now malignant, and probably you can survive through medication forever, and progress is exponential. It's inconceivable. Now that we know that a cure is out there, all the scientific minds in the world can't come together to find a research that Josef Mengele, him alone, did find. We tell you it's only a matter of time, and this is about whether we want accelerated progress at the expense of ethics, or we want to be ethical and take our time to reach there. Vinod told you how it is assumed to be a malignant disease, and some cancers are already curable. We also told you about the principal argumentation of adhering to the golden rule, the human rights and deontology, especially when who you are on this side of the earth is due to the lottery of birth. You have no dominance or claim of the rights over someone else's body to your own benefit. All those things are benefits in of itself, regardless of outcome, that we have yet to hear a response from side opposition. I'll tell you about number one, through this cure, when people know that this cure comes from Josef Mengele and it exists and they can use it, you vastly reduce political and social opposition to horrible, unethical methods. Secondly, we also prove to you why most human experimentation fails, and therefore the body count, even if you look at it through a utilitarian principle, we still win, right? But let's engage in a few rebuttals. Number one, for these days, we wouldn't glorify the individual, no money goes to him. But there was no analysis whatsoever why Josef Mengele wouldn't be glorified. One, it is clear that his research works and his research can cure individuals. We tell you, when a person saves your lives, right? People who are saved, they normally will revel and have gratitude towards that individual. Which is why a lot of people right now in Myanmar, they still defend Aung San Suu Kyi because at least she fought for democracy. There's a lot of Hitler apologies because they said Hitler has a point. He revived Germany's economy during World War II, right? There was no link whatsoever from why those individuals wouldn't be glorified. If there is glory to be gotten in saving someone, would rather that glory goes to the medical community who work tirelessly through ethical methods to achieve that cure at the end of the day. But at least there's restorative justice, right? At least we reduce the number of injustice in this world. But did you ask, how do you know you reduce this injustice? Have you asked the person with the conjoined twins which Josef Mengele was dissecting in order to find a cure? We tell you it is not up to you to make a choice for the victims who are experimented on, to say at least that there's a moral benefit coming out of your suffering, because we say it's specific to each individual. The extent of the suffering does not replace the quantity, the quantity does not replace the extent of someone suffering. That is why we reject evidence garnered through torture or under unethical methods, even if the evidence is already there. You can't use it in court because we recognize that the method in which you got the evidence, even though it's already there, is unethical and therefore it will never be used. That is why we burn the elephant husk that is gotten through like raiding smuggler camps, even though the husk is already there, because it's unethical as to how we achieve those husks. But lastly, they said, but you as a medical professional, you are not adhering to your standards of medical ethics because you are not doing all that you can to save your patient. But look, there's a limit as to the definition, all that you can, right? You can't do everything that you want to do to save your patient. For example, your patient is dying of organ failure. You can't go to the street, shoot someone and get the organ to save the person just because that person is your patient. There are limits and there are ethical procedures upon which you must come to a cure to save your patient. And we tell you, we are the ones adhering the closest to those medical ethics. Moving on to my point, before that, yes. Closing.
Form of cancer available right now, like bone cancer. Can you tell me when, given that there's no cure now, when you will find that cure to make this debate more?
So, like probably bone number one, like with the exponential much of progress, given that we've already solved 7 types of cancer, I think we can find it. But number two, even if it's a bit far to the future, we can bite that bullet, because ultimately bone cancer is 1% of cancer sufferers out there. Given that we can like progressively reduce the number of people suffering from non-curable cancers, we tell you the injustice is not that much. Now, why exactly? What message do you send out to governments and the people, right? Right now, there are already a lot of very dodgy things happening out there, right? In India, the medical schools, they often use like the poor and the suffering, people starving on the streets, in order to conduct medical experiments to provide for cheap treatments, right? In South Africa, a lot of children are abducted from their families in order to come for those cures. But there has always been a push back against this. Most governments illegalize this because, number one, it is shown that there is no benefits that are occurring whatsoever from all these medical unethical practices, right? Because they have yet to come out with any significant improvements to society. And number two, added to the fact that it is unethical. What happens now? You show people that there's indeed a benefit that can be garnered through unethical research to oppressing the poor and the suffering. And the face of these unethical methods will be the cure for cancer. We tell you what happens now. You vastly reduce societal opposition among the privileged people who can vote to these methods, because now they themselves accrue a benefit from all these methods. This is why people are willing to turn a blind eye towards the worker exploitation in South Africa and China, because they themselves benefit from cheap Nike shoes, right? So we say the moment where you allow people to see that there are tangible benefits coming from unethical experimentation, there will still be people pushing back because of unethical methods, but you vastly reduce the number of those individuals and you vastly increase the pushback to those movements, because now people will say that my family was cured because of unethical experimentation. Let us turn a blind eye to this because I will accrue benefits in the future. What does this mean? Number one, your governments are likely to turn a blind eye towards those practices that oppresses the poor and the marginal. Secondly, your people are less likely to object or point them out. But thirdly, government will even have their own programs because they know they can get away with it, right? So what's the comparative? Would rather a society that believes unethical experimentation has never accrued any benefits, would rather a society that sees the benefits in ethical practices, because we will be the ones who find the cure for cancer, would rather a sinless society moving forward into the future, creating a better world for everyone, regardless of your lottery of birth.
Note that side-opening government's case rely on two premises. Number one, the fact that they downplay the actual very realistic harms of cancer, which, by the way, maybe some of them maybe have some cure. The way in which you get that cure and the way in which you go through that treatment is still really painful. But the majority of other cancers still is cureless, and people still suffer from it. But secondly, another thing that they raise their case on is that all their arguments is dependent on one principle: that as a result of the medical community using this cure, you are harming other people in the process. I do not know why this is true. In my speech today, I would tell you how more people are likely to be harmed on the net under their world. But before that, I have just I think 2 issues of rebuttals to the speaker before me. The first issue: what is the principle of the medical community, and what is the best way to follow these principles? Because I think both sides agree that no harm unto others is sort of the overall principle that the medical community should follow. So the first thing I'd like to say is that if you adopt the medical community, you don't actually impose physical harms on anyone. The comparative is this: in the moment that you are in a position where you can cure a majority of people, and a lot of people in the future who now must wait for other cures of cancer, that means you choose to allow all these cancer patients to go through years of chemotherapy that don't work. You force young children born with lymphatic cancer who did not consent to this cancer as well. I think these are all the people that are directly harmed as a direct result of your decision. But then Vino contradicts himself by saying no harm unto others, but then there's this golden rule as well: you cannot benefit if you harm other people. I think literally what Vinod is saying is you cannot save your own life if it harms other people. That's really messed up for 2 main reasons. Number one, you don't actually harm others when you use this cure. Why? The first thing is the cure for cancer was not a result of what's his name, Joseph's time in Auschwitz. Literally, the things that he used in the gas in that concentration camp had no direct relation to the way he had the cure of cancer. We don't think they can figure that out immediately. But the second thing, if you're curing yourself, if you're curing yourself of cancer, because the moment that you cure yourself of cancer, we don't think that the moment that you choose to cure yourself of cancer and use the cure brought by Joseph doesn't mean that you saved the people that were under the Auschwitz concentration camp under his world. Because unfortunately, and this is really unfortunate, these people will still suffer under both worlds. But the difference is this: as a result of this, you'll use it as a reason to harm other people as well. And we don't think that's particularly fair. But even if this is true, even if for some reason they can prove that the cure for cancer was a result of his time in concentration camp, I don't know how they could prove it. But even if it's true, this is when Felice gave you explicit analysis as to how the victimhood between a person who survived Auschwitz and a person suffering from cancer is on equal grounds. The distinction here is that the people suffering under our world are more direct. They still have an ability to move out of their suffering that they are in, but move out of the suffering that they're in. But under your world, the people that you want to save, unfortunately, did not get to survive as a result of it. So we don't think at this point we should prioritize the ability for people to opt out of their suffering, given that they have a chance to do so. Before I move on, Jay.
Why did we first introduce ethics and moral, and at what point do we discard ethics and moral?
Look, cancer is a substantial torture to the rest of the world. The fact that a lot of people have been trying to find a cure for cancer, the fact that it has killed millions of people and is still the leading cause of death in many countries, means that there has to be that means that there is a direct harm to not giving the cure to cancer in that regard. They need to prove to us why, in order to uphold this image of ethical medicine, means that it's good enough to come at the cost of millions of people who still suffer from cancer. But the second thing that I would like to extend from this issue is that we think that the moment someone, in order for I think, like the medical community, the moment that they use this cure, can be quite akin to self-defense, which is a form of saving your life, even it comes at the cost of others. Why do I say so? We think the first thing, there's something Felice already said, is that cancer is indiscriminate and unpredictable. It can harm everyone at any given time. You can be born with it, unfortunately, or you can get it after adopt it after years of living in certain conditions, right? These people who suffer from cancer have very little defense against cancer, also have very little say in how not to get cancer. As a result of that, if there's literally only one opportunity for them to opt out of that suffering, and that opportunity is literally only using Joseph's cure, we think that's when it's justified for them to use this cure as a result, use this cure in order to save themselves. That's when it's akin to self-defense, given that there is literally no other viable option for them to opt out of it. As a result of that, we think that's fair for not only people to use this cure, but secondly, the medical community literally has a right to uphold their main principle: no harm unto others. But the second issue, right? The message given to other, so this deals with OG's idea about this image and the message given to the individuals from the medical community. I will explain how it gets a lot worse on your side, because their main claim is this: that saving human lives and taking away taking away cancer is less important than how people view the medical community. I have no idea why this is true, right? Because they say that you leave a gateway for unethical medical research. Note that this is like a hypothetical outcome as compared to the direct outcome of you literally not saving a bunch of people who still suffer from cancer. If you outweigh the amount of actual benefits and most tangible benefits that are more likely to occur, our benefits is more likely to occur then, as compared to the harm about people are going to view medical community as really bad. But even if it's true, right, we think under your side, when you ignore the cure, it becomes a lot worse then. Why do I say so? Note, people aren't as altruistic as you want them to be. When you suffer, when your parents or when your sister suffers from cancer, or when you suffer from cancer and you have to pay half of your salary just to have chemotherapy, that's why I think it's justified for people to want to prioritize themselves over what other people have in that regard. We think as a result, the moment that you choose not to, the moment that the medical community literally publicly says that I will not use this cure for ABC reason, we think that's when people are more likely to be angered, right? And these are people that have suffered through years, or have parents that have suffered through years, or people who have lost people as a result of cancer. You cannot say that they'll be like, yeah, we don't want it because just Joseph guy was bad. We think they'll be a lot more angrier when they realize that there was a chance for them to opt out, but you didn't give them the opportunity to opt out because of someone did years before. I don't understand what the comparative is. We think there'll be more backlash on your side when people realize that the medical community supports really vague, this vague aspect of ethical medicine over actually saving human lives in that present time, right? This is when people are more likely to downplay the Holocaust. They'll be like, oh, it didn't really happen. It didn't really happen that bad. Why couldn't they have done this in our? Why couldn't they have saved it, given that it didn't happen that bad in their world? We think there's more people are likely to blame certain individuals for not being able to cure their own cancer and opt out of their suffering. We don't think that's fair for the medical community to actually opt out, to actually not use a cure that can save millions of lives. I'm proud to oppose.
I think yell over that speech to start the closing exchange and invite a member of the
Panel, the preservation of humankind cannot just be about the physical embodiments of humans or the protection of human physicalities, but must also account for the sanctity of the collective consciousness of humanity and the framework of morality. What do I mean by this? Death and suffering are inevitable, and the cumulative sum of your life experiences shapes and ultimately becomes the legacy that you leave behind. I think that we must account for the preservation of human souls as well, to not have gotten through life knowingly at the expense and in harming another individual. I'm going to note here that the debate thus far has become a clash between what is worse in status quo. Is it cancer or is it the Holocaust? This is why I respond to opening opposition and the scale of victimhood, because closing government is not going to make a judgment about which suffering is worse or which suffering is better, because both are victims in their own circumstances. Both didn't consent to choose, right? I'm not going to put a value over the suffering. At best, opening opposition's conception of what the scale of victimhood looks like comes from Katrina's speech. Oh, it didn't happen at Auschwitz, this experiment, so it's less bad than when a person goes through like the daily therapies and the daily treatments of cancer. Ladies and gentlemen, the timeline of this debate makes no sense, but that must also account for our ability to remain human in both instances, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, opposition can't claim the numbers game, because the ability for us to assess which suffering has more victims is like into the millions. I really don't know how do we best adjudicate who wins more victims, ladies and gentlemen. They can't do that as well. Lastly, on backlash, right? So they say patients are going to be really upset once they find out they are cancer. I think backlash is non-comparative, because on our side of the house, backlash can exist as well, because opening opposition assumes that there are no victims of the Holocaust or victims of this doctor that are still alive in status quo and can look at his value and whether or not his suffering is something that can be tangential to the rest of humanity. We have to look at the larger picture in this debate. So I'm going to discuss morality and the conception of morality and how that impacts daily interactions between individuals as well as countries. But firstly, I'm just going to answer this. Why does the medical community have an obligation beyond what opening government provided to you? Because oftentimes for the medical community, we view them as the more moral actors in society, because the conception is they sacrifice so much, they are so brave, they make much harder decisions and take upon a larger burden than us. I think they become examples to us in status quo, and the action of destroying this is a visceral one because you know that the suffering existed, right? So you have victims who survived the torture that this Joseph did and can speak out about this, and oftentimes because we view the medical communities as saviors, we legitimize this trade-off that is apparently necessary. We move forward in life thinking that perhaps the suffering that happened before, because it was decades ago, is less relevant because it is in the now. I don't think with respect to morality and suffering that we should place an absolute and objective timeline, because the timeline does not exist. So let's look at the impact of discussing this, right? Let's look at morality. Why did humankind agree on the rule of ethics to begin with? We agreed on the rule of ethics as a consensus because we wanted to guide people above and beyond the primal instincts and the primal intuition of human being, which often operates on individualistic, selfish tendencies to often prioritize oneself over the community, ladies and gentlemen. And that becomes and this is collected and reframed and discussed as a consensus over time, and now guides our actions as human beings and as communities. So this is based on things like legislation, rule of law, as well as just daily social interaction. This is also how we decided medical ethics, whether or not we wanted to harm individuals. That's why doctors can't make a call as to whether or not they want to save one patient over the other. At a point where there's an emergency, for example, they must as much as possible try to balance between the two to save lives, right? So what is the outcome at the point where we don't destroy this? I think what we do firstly is that we revert back to our tendencies to be individualistic, selfish, and in this nature. We set a much lower bar in society to when we necessarily decide to trade off lives. And I think that, for example, things like limits of war, for example, or the interaction in which we engage and intervene in people's considerations and people's conflicts, right? I think the world currently is at a tipping point where you have instances like Trump or war, disease and famine. I think morality guides us in this instance because it's a balance of trying to maintain status quo as much as possible to account for different kinds of suffering. What this does is that it absolutely removes the barrier in which we account for the importance of individual. So perhaps we look at the utility based on like the region that person is in and make the calculation and say your suffering is much less because war is apparently a larger suffering than famine, because war is more immediate, famine is long term. You can't see the necessary harm of famine in an immediate instance, right? I don't think we want that. I think what it does is shapes communities and countries to have more limited interaction, ladies and gentlemen. Second, I think it actively dehumanizes people as well. What is the specific nuance? Who did Mengele torture? They were Jews, gays, twins, blacks, and Muslims, all on the premise that they had initial ingrained defects that they were born with that did not come from the cis like white people or from communities that are typically viewed to be more superior, ladies and gentlemen. What do? No, I think we diminish the value of that community because it's historical as well. It carries through, right? It's a legacy of that community that still stands till today, right? And I think the distinction is now attach a nuance to that community and legitimizes the discrimination that we often feel against communities that are others than us, right? Because often now we view the utility of these individuals as their fulfillment of their role to other people and not attach the same kind of propensity and the same kind of obligation or over everyone, ladies and gentlemen. I think it shows that these communities can only feel value when the value is attached to them uplifting other people. Lastly, on victims, right? I think that, firstly, this is just an insult on the history of the victims to say, perhaps some good came out of this. Yeah, you died, but we helped more people. I think we need to be able to take a more consistent, more moral stance to say that we reject absolutely any abhorrent position that this doctor took upon you. And if there are benefits that derive out of it, we do not deserve that benefit because it is at your expense, ladies and gentlemen. I think it also bolsters things like Holocaust denial because the narrative is either the Holocaust didn't exist because the genocide were scientific experiments that were beneficial to the world and to the community, or that it wasn't that bad because we were able to get something out of it. So in status quo, Holocaust denial relies on ambiguous notions of people having different preferences or different narratives to what the Holocaust is. Now, you give them something objective, something that they can clamp onto and something that they can use to justify any means of reparations against victims, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think this debate must prioritize one group of humanity over another just because it's a different timeline. We must prioritize the sanctity of humankind across all ages. I've never been prouder to propose.
I think it's absolutely hypocritical to argue that we shouldn't place a premium on human lives and at the same time make all the arguments to say why we should prioritize the victims of the Holocaust. And tell me why the benefits don't matter as much when it comes to the utility of the number of people we're saving from cancer research. It is just disingenuous to argue that the value of life is inherently and the value of suffering is inherently the same for all people and there can be no comparison made. That's the same as making the logic that one person dying is as bad as 500 people dying because he feels like 500 people died inside him at the same time, right? I think there are objective metrics to judge this debate by, and that is to say that any moral philosophy that we want to apply has to be based on quantifying the kind of decisions that we can make to begin with, right? Yes, whether it's a utilitarian approach or a deontological approach, we need to analyze what's the best moral philosophy to argue whether or not this decision is morally acceptable. Like, there is a timeline, and most of my arguments will engage with the closing and the opening. Lastly, I don't understand this argument about how you revert back to being individualistic and selfish and how it diminishes the value of the community. If anything, my extension will give you reasons why it's more likely to provide for the improvement of that community or the increased valuation of that community to begin with. So in my speech, I'm going to talk about why we should choose the utilitarian moral route, and secondly, why the choice to destroy that evidence to begin with is inherently immoral. Because the closing government in this debate talks about not doing anything. It doesn't take the burden of saying that they will destroy that evidence. I'll tell you why the destruction of that evidence is inherently immoral. So the utilitarian moral, no thank you. Like, it is objective, right? You save millions of people because it is available for people to use. Like, a lot of the reasons why, like, people are out of poverty right now is because during the building of the American railroads, for example, or during the Industrial Revolution, there were millions of people who were used as slave labor or used as labor that were unpaid, right? Or used as like individuals who were treated poorly in their working conditions. But right now, millions of more people and over time billions have been lifted out of poverty by having access to more capital, by having access to being able to buy more medicine, for example. Now, opening government in this debate attempted to like subvert this debate by saying there's no trade-off, right? In fact, we harm more people on their side because more people will be incentivized to hurt other people, like because there's a precedence that is set here. Here's why the incentive doesn't work. Like, I get that this is a philosophical debate, right? But it's valuable in its application in today's context, which is what the arguments that they made were premised on to begin with. It is illegal to do all these things. It is illegal to test and torture on someone else. Their response to this is that, well, people will now vote to test on themselves because it will lead to some kind of greater benefit, right? So if people are democratic and realize that if their own, like, if it harms themselves, then they're unlikely to vote for laws changing to be able to sacrifice the rights of the few, right? Because that few could be them itself. That even like the poor make up the largest voter base in any democracy is unlikely to vote for a policy that will subjugate them to begin with. So democratically, it makes no sense for these individuals to vote for their own like deleterious harm, right? Secondly, it is statistically speaking, it is just very, very difficult to be able to like replicate this cure of cancer to begin with, right? Like even if you take the 1,000 sample size that this Mangalam Fuller did, like you can't get the same kind of results, right? Because like the chance of finding that cure for cancer is 0.01%. If people can know how probabilities work, they are unlikely to take up that option of doing the same bloody thing because they know that they're not going to get that particular outcome again, right? So it's just an irrational choice to make to begin with. That is why this is one event in history that has somehow created a cure for cancer and will be that one event in history. But lastly, in terms of the certainty of cancer patients dying on their side versus maybe we vote to treat poor people badly to gain what? Like, how do you vote to treat them badly to gain, like, what is it that you gain? Like the more cancer like cures, like I don't know what happens in opening government, right? So I think just statistically speaking, it's a bad decision. Secondly, no thank you. So that's why there is an inherent utilitarian trade-off. That's a conclusion, right? And it's the best way to decide is an objective way to decide. Secondly, I would say that people do not like dying in vain. So I think it's the best thing that we can do in this debate between choosing whether the victims of the genocide or victims of cancer, like I think the best way to make that decision is when these people act in the most amount of agency possible, right? So I think we can argue that people often don't like being invaded, that their death is useless, is often more harmful to their integrity and dignity as a community, right? If they can say that their death resulted in so much net good to society, then it's more likely to embolden themselves and embolden their community, right? I can feel good in the death that I had. So if it was possible to gain their consent, this is what they would have said. Thirdly, in terms of the medical community, no thank you. If the people before them, that's the millions of people dying of cancer, not the millions of people or thousands of people who have died in the past, right? So lastly, on this cancer being solved thing, like, of cancer has been solved. Secondly, if you take the cancer that has not been solved, times it by 300 years of victims, that's millions of people who will die for certain. You cannot argue that it's less on your side, right? Why is the destruction itself immoral? Yeah.
You reduce political opposition to deadly experiments on the poor and vulnerable because the privileged now benefit from those experimentations. You are merely swapping the role of victim from cancer patient to a children in India.
Yeah.
Why is that morally justified?
You need to tell me that why would the poor be able to vote for these policies that will screw them over to begin with? How it democratically removed from the system, lobbying will not be able to make people confident to put a policy that will screw them over, right? That argument doesn't work here. Also culpability. So why is your destruction itself immoral? If you don't hack, no harm to the cancer patient. But if you act, you are personally responsible for the death of the patients in those hospitals. So whether you do or don't, those victims in the past are dead. What you are doing now is making a valuation of life as the medical community, right? That destruction means you value the victims more than the current patients right now. That is a judgment you do not get to make. And it's not morally acceptable for the medical community to decide who is more important. If they choose to use that, that is not their choice to use the cancer cure to begin with, right? The choice of patients to use doctors as a tool to administer the cure to them. So it's not the doctors exercising choice, but the doctors exercise their choice personally when they choose to destroy the cure to begin with. And you will note that this is deleterious to both the utilitarian and deontological moral philosophy, right? You don't help the greater good, but at the same time, you make an act that like a specific act, a positive act that destroys the lives of millions, as opposed to doing nothing as a medical community and letting patients of cancer better alive, because it's absolutely torturous. Like, we don't know when they'll find the cure. We are happy to oppose.
Ladies and gentlemen, inside closing government, we did not prioritize any one victim. At best, that was opening government. We prioritize humankind and the sanctity of humankind. But also, the model is the same. We destroy all evidence. If opening government already modeled to destroy, closing government need not to provide a new model unless we want to knife, which we don't, right? Yeah. So what Kelvin wanted to talk about is the first thing that he just spent like the very 6 minutes of his speech was talking about probabilities, which was a rehash of opening opposition, except probably was more funnier, right? All right, okay, probability, sure. But it was not responsive to the extension given by Jay, right? Because our larger goal of today's debate is the construction of morality, because it is beyond just hard numbers, and it's just beyond the quantification of how many people you save. Because the morality that you uphold in yourself shapes the types of decision that you make in the end of the day. It shapes the type of generation that you want people to look at. Is it those who are like just using a particular group as a form of utility, or is it not having that sort of morality to begin with, right? So the debate simplicity really is not about
whether we are going to find the cure of cancer or which side has like saved the most cancer patients. It is just very simple, simply about which world do we use people as a form of utility, or which world do we uphold our morality and say that we will not use the violence of another particular group in order for us to save our current humankind. And it is the only thing that closing government is able to engage with in today's debate. Sit down. In a world where we identify ourselves as sentient beings with morality, uphold it collectively or individually, right? We actively try to distinct ourselves with like the people that were in like the World War where they actively were in war, right? So how is this relevant in today's debate? Because it is not about quantifying the amount of people you save when you have the cure of cancer. Because if that cure came from the cost of innocent people dying, came from the cost of people being imprisoned in the hand of Josef Mengele, we tell you that literally that is putting blood in this medical community's hand, and that literally invades the whole like idea of having ethics to begin with, right? So how do we differentiate from OG in this particular debate? Because they only talk to you about not only the medical community has a principle to not reap the benefit of to not reap the benefit from a particular group of violence, right? And also the ethical standards and the upholdment of it by the medical community. How we differ is we told you that the act of using human beings is a means of utility and is immoral in general. But the very fact that the medical community is looked at as the most exemplary community in a particular society, as the most intelligent and contributive, sends the message to individuals that it is okay to use a person as a means to an end. It is okay for people to treat other individuals and want to reap the sort of benefit that they want. It is not just like specifically about curing cancer, but it's that message you send to people that you can use another individual in order for you to get the benefit end of the day. Because we tell you that not only it sends the message that it's okay to use human beings as a sort of utility, it also legitimizes the acts of violence which happens during that particular time frame. The Holocaust and how people suffered in that way. It enforces these Holocaust denials that only came from psychological government that they never talked to you about. But more importantly, the shift of morality that occurs reverts human beings to become more primate beings, which disrupts the whole collective community. Building that I will strengthen in my speech later that I think Kelvin didn't understand, which was probably didn't do it, right? So what did we tell you in the day, right? We told you that we want to prioritize morality and how it clashes with the whole ethics that you have in yourself to begin with. Because humankind is not just about self-preservation or any sort of physical embodiment. We know that death is inevitable, but what goes longer than that? It is the morality that you uphold in yourself. It is the collective consciousness that which came out in our rule of ethics. Because in order for you to understand this, you must first understand what is the natural inclination of people before we had our morality that we instill in ourselves, right? The natural inclination of us is to self-preserve, is to have benefits and to have the self-interest that we want, which is why we have these sort of ethical rules and morality rules that restricts us from using other people in order to reap the benefits at the end of the day. Therefore, the very existence of the development of morality that you like accrue on your side, because now you are able to kind of get the benefit from torturing these people in that particular time frame, disrupts this whole ethicity in yourself, because now you know that it's okay for you to use other people in order for you to get the sort of benefit, right? So like the very fact that Josef Mengele did this sort of atrocities on people, on those who are imprisoned on them, right? It means that these people were utilized in that circumstance because they were different, because they had abnormalities. How does this impact the individuals at hand when you have that sort of message being sent to people, right? It shows that individuals who have this sort of abnormalities will only be able to feel the sort of worthlessness in themselves if some other person use them in that particular time. We feel that it is highly injustice to those people. Not only do we want to prioritize those who have cancer, but it also impacts like community in general and how it disrupts their whole life being Extreme desperation makes people individualistic and lose their ethical morality. If you are dying from cancer and you are also a privileged rich person, you are more likely to vote for laws that go to extreme means so that you can get your cure. Why would they not lose their? The comparative is by giving them that sort of cure in that particular, it only benefits them. But what does the message send to people at large? It sends to people that you should not uphold the morality that you have. It sends message to people that you can use this sort of cure in order for you to get the benefit to yourself. Because we believe that in the end of the day, what governs your own actions is the morality that you have. And once you disrupt that in a collective way, then it disrupts the whole like ecosystem of people living in that particular circumstance, right? So like the third thing that we talked to you about is like Holocaust denials and how they further legitimize these people. Because it is not about prioritizing any humankind in line to save another, like what side opposition wants, right? Because it is about protecting the way we think of other individuals, protecting the way in which our generation would always think of Holocaust as a genocide that was like violent and we do not ever want to have that particular circumstance at now, right? So when we still have victims of this Holocaust in this particular scenario where they know that their families were murdered and now were used as a means of utility in order to save another humankind, we believe that it further legitimizes the idea that they were killed in the genocide was legitimized, and the act of Holocaust is there to begin with. So if you want to go with a world where you uphold morality and not just use other human beings as a form of utility, then go with site closing government.
Panel, we think the act in concern in this debate is not the act of using humans as a tool of research. It's the act of choosing to destroy the evidence, to destroy the cure that is already present, it's already existing. That is the morality that we want to examine in this debate today. It's not the morality of Josef Mengele's actions, it's the morality of you as the medical profession actively choosing to destroy the piece of cure. Having said that, let's deal with a few things coming from the Gov bench. Firstly, that does not fit into the rest of the issues. Firstly, OG talks about this like ethical cure, cancer being more and more like not as serious of an issue. That's the extent of their analysis as to why they sort of win the utilitarian clash, the utilitarian numbers game. We don't think that's true, right? At most, like even if we give them the best case, like there's still cancer patients that die. We don't think that's entirely very effective at all. Next, they talk about this principle, right, of golden rule of the Hippocratic oath of the medical profession. Something like you can't shoot someone to save your patient. I agree, you can't do that by most by most social norms. But there are two actors here, right? Firstly, there's you as the medical profession, and then secondly, there's Mengele, who's the inflictor of the harm. So I think a more accurate representation of the Hippocratic oath is that if a person is shot by someone else, can you then, as a doctor of a patient, use that person who was shot to save your patient? Because you're not the one who's inflicting the harm, you see. Someone else is inflicting the harm. You're just improving the net benefits of that situation, right? So I don't think you do harm just by destroying. And the thing is, you didn't do harm just by not destroying the cure. I don't think that kind of harm exists. I don't think morality is in that act in itself. Next, let's sit down. Next, they talk about how it benefits oppressor. It talks about how it benefits Mengele. Like, let's be real, like, he's either dead or rotting in jail somewhere, even if he's alive. Like, it's World War II, like fucking 60 years ago. Like, then he talks about, oh, you glorify him. Like, I think, what glorification, right? At best, you just call it, oh, the cancer cure. Like, you don't have to be specific and call it the Josef Mengele cure for cancer. Like, even if you do identify that, oh, it is the Josef Mengele cure for cancer, oftentimes it's, like, it could arguably be better, right? At least, like, there's some backstory about how this cure was garnered by, oh, the suffering of the victims, stuff like that. We think, yeah, give out the cure. It's good for the community anyway. Sit down. CG. We think value of the community. Then they say value of the community. The people didn't choose to be tested. They about some birth lottery. There are abnormalities. They are twins. They are Jews. That kind of thing. And values. And like basically, this policy means you value one community over another. We think it's correct. It's correct. But the destruction of the cure is in itself a valuation, right, of the victims of the Holocaust over the victims of the disease of cancer, right? We don't see how this valuation is something, wow, very special to you guys. You guys don't value, but we value. I don't see how that, like, extension stands. Like, let's move on to the issues. Like, firstly, sit down. Firstly, what happens realistically? Secondly, which is the act upon which a moral judgment should be made? Is it, on the act of researching on humans, or like the act of destroying the evidence? And lastly, why we win both utilitarianism and deontology, right? Firstly, what happens realistically? I think you don't destroy the evidence, you don't destroy the cure. That means Mengele's research kills many people, a lot of people, maybe 6 million Jews, if that's the current count. So people get cancer cure, they don't die. You destroy the cure. Mengele's research killed the same amount of people, because, like, just because you destroy or you don't destroy, it doesn't mean the people who are killed lessens magically somehow. It happens 70 years ago. Like, it killed the same amount of people. People don't get the cancer cure, they die. So if anything, like Kel also told you why it's important to give meaning in achieving give meanings in achieving a positive utility in suffering. Given that the net amount of suffering is the same, it's important to attach some utility, some positive benefits to the suffering, and that exists in, like, giving cancer patients cure. So I think utility-wise, we definitely win this clash, right? Because the only thing they have going for them is, oh, cancer is slowly becoming not as harmful. Like, yeah, I don't think that's really the thing. Like, sit down. Like, what time is it now? Like, 5 what? Oh, 5:20. Chill out. Okay, so which is the act upon which a moral judgment should be made? So I think this is important, right? Because if it proves that the morality of Mengele's action has no meaningful relevance in this debate, that means that the metric is A, not the net utility of the cure and the death of the people, and B, the morality of the act of destruction in itself. I'll take closing. Yeah, so I think like, you value people, right? Like, when you destroy it, you value the people who died over the people who have cancer. Like, I don't think that valuation is, like, the difference is you actively if you destroy it, the culpability is on you, because you actively chose to do that valuation, as opposed to you not doing something. The cure exists, but the valuation is done by someone else. It's not your fault. It's not your culpability. I'll explain this later, right? So, yeah. OG says it's unethical because birth lottery, etc., etc., etc. Like, Gov Bench idea of morality is hinged upon a value judgment of Josef Mengele's horrendous research. We think it's correct, it's damn immoral, but he should die in hell. But Kelvin also told you that the morality of his action is irrelevant, right? Like, the net suffering of Mengele's victim is static, they die anyway. So the act upon which we judge is the act of destruction. Like, why can't our decision to save cancer patients be the guiding moral principle? I don't think, like, that's the question they really answer. So like, I think even if Gov just assumes a moral principle. They don't tell you why the immorality of the research transcends upon the morality of the act of destruction in itself. We think due to that, we think they need to come to the debate and prove the immorality of the action of destroying the cure in itself and killing people without cure. We think we win this debate. Thank you.